Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel where today we're exploring one of the most powerful and emotionally painful schemas in the schema therapy model, the schema of punitiveness. This particular schema and the stories that are connected to it is all about the deep-rooted belief that people, including ourselves, deserve to be harshly punished for making mistakes or for breaking the rules. There's often no room for compassion, empathy, forgiveness, or understanding in the world of someone who holds this schema within their personality system. So if you're ready, let's get into it. The schema of punitiveness is one that has a significant impact on those that hold it within their system. When we're trapped in the world of punitiveness, compassion is a way of being that feels unsafe. Forgiveness just feels wrong. And emotional vulnerability? That feels like a threat that carries a level of danger that flips us instantly into a state of emotional distress. This schema drives people to be harsh on themselves and unforgiving towards others, and it makes close, emotionally safe, vulnerable relationships incredibly difficult to maintain. As with all of our maladaptive and ineffective stories, the schema of punitiveness is usually rooted in our childhood. When we grow up in environments where caregivers are critical, demanding, or emotionally cold, we are notably more vulnerable to its development in our system. Following are some examples of a few common childhood experiences that we recognize can be major contributors to the creation of this schema. As children, if we're often shamed or scolded for what are small or actually extremely minor mistakes, we quickly learn that imperfection equals punishment. If we hear things on a regular basis being pushed on us like stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, grow up and get over it, or the classic suck it up buttercup, we start judging ourselves for having any kind of feelings at all. If our caregivers view the world in very black and white terms, holding everything as absolute with little to no flexibility, even small errors can begin to feel like huge moral failures. Without a parental figure that's able to be compassionate, empathetic, and accepting, we don't internalize a nurturing voice. Instead, we develop an extremely harsh internal critic. At the root of this particular schema are two unmet emotional needs: unconditional love and emotional validation. In adult life, the schema of punitiveness creates deep emotional and behavioural consequences. It produces an internal narrative that's directed not only at ourselves, but also at the people around us. This narrative has us filled with things like anger, guilt, shame, and resentment. So let's take a quick look at how it can show up exactly within our behavioural responses. Let's suppose that I'm an individual with the schema of punitiveness that's deep-rooted within my system. As a result, I often engage in harsh self-talk and I experience chronic self-criticism. I tend to feel deep shame and guilt over minor mistakes or perceived flaws, and forgiving myself can be extremely difficult as I hold myself to rigid and unforgiving standards. This often leads me into perfectionistic tendencies or controlling behaviours as a way to avoid future errors and the self-punishment that's bound to follow. Let's also suppose that I'm someone who has a schema of punitiveness that's directed towards others. If this is the case, it'll usually show up as being highly judgmental towards the people around me. There's very little tolerance for mistakes, and rather than responding with empathy, I may withdraw from or punish those who fall short of my expectations. This pattern can also manifest in harsh parenting or rigid leadership styles, where control and discipline are prioritized over understanding and emotional connection. It's often the case that those of us with a schema of punitiveness shut down emotionally, using things like work, substance, or emotional distance to escape from the possibility of vulnerability. As a result, this usually leads to some kind of burnout or social isolation. In schema therapy, the conversation often revolves around something we call modes, those behaviours that different parts of our personality use to take over our actions in response to the emotional experience we're fighting in life. The schema of punitiveness tends to activate a few key modes of behaviour. This is the inner critic that exists within many of us. It mimics that voice of the early caregivers and punishes us for the most tiniest of flaws. It often says things like, "You're disgusting," or "You'll never be good enough," or "You're an idiot," or "You're a loser." And it leaves our system filled with the emotion of shame, which is usually strongly connected to the vulnerable child that we're desperately trying to protect. This part demands perfection, using black and white or all or nothing language. It's often the case that if the expected perfection isn't achieved, the punitive critic jumps in to take over our internal narrative to dish out the language of punishment. This is the part of us that feels unloved, it feels ashamed, and often it feels unworthy. It's kept hidden deep within our system, and it comes out only during emotional breakdowns. To escape our emotional pain, we simply numb out. Substance and process addiction are common aspects of life, using things like work, alcohol, pornography, anger, cocaine, or any of the well-known addictive, obsessive, or compulsive coping mechanisms to shut down those unwanted feelings. If everything else fails, dissociation often takes over. It's the ultimate solution to the problem of uncomfortable emotional experiences, and it's a simple matter of doing whatever it takes to avoid any type of feeling. When it comes to my own personal experience with the schema of punitiveness, it's one that, to be perfectly honest with you, I wouldn't say is a part of my prominent internal storylines. At the same time, it is definitely one of the cascading schemas that regularly follows on from the activation of fear within my system, particularly when this fear is connected to the possibility of the toxic guilt and shame that's associated with my primary schema of defectiveness. When it's in full flow, my schema of punitiveness shows up with a rigid set of beliefs regarding the need to follow rules, to obey the law, and to never deviate from the required social norms connected to my current situation. My internal punitive and demanding critics are going through the process of pointing out their own unique and wildly tainted perspective inside of my personality system. When this narrative is aimed at the external world, it leaves me filled with frustration, resentment, anger, and sometimes even rage directed solely at the people around me. It's not acceptable. They need to be punished, and they shouldn't be allowed to get away with what it is that they're currently doing. I'm trapped in the ruminating thoughts connected to my desire to control, thoughts that, if I'm not careful, debilitate my system to the point of not being able to function in an effective or adaptive way at all. When the narrative is directed internally, it usually leaves me with the sense of toxic guilt and shame that I mentioned before. Generally regarding my own capacity to live up to the expectations I've rigidly set for myself and the rules that I'm supposed to follow. These stories can show up in so many different ways, but more often than not, it's in what you might call more mundane day-to-day social situations. Things like visiting the grocery store, waiting in line to purchase an item, or simply driving from one destination to another. When I'm not aware, the impact of this need to punish myself or the people around me for not following the rules that I perceive to be in place is one that usually stops me from being who I want to be in the area of life that I'm in at that particular point in time. Schema therapy helps us map out and understand the structure and impact of the schema of punitiveness. It gives us a framework to recognize how this belief system operates and where it originates from. At the same time, when it comes to actually changing how we feel and behave in response to this schema, dialectical behaviour therapy provides us with the practical tools to take it on. One of the most powerful tools DBT offers is mindfulness, particularly the practice of observing without judgment. When the punitive critic mode gets triggered by the schema of punitiveness, mindfulness helps us create distance between ourselves and that harsh inner voice. It allows us to recognize the voice for what it is, a part of us, but not the whole truth. Next, the distress tolerance skills teach us how to manage emotional pain without resorting to punishment. self-criticism, or complete shutdown. When we're hurting, we don't have to lash out, both internally and externally. Instead, we can use strategies like the tip skill, changing our temperature, engaging in intense exercise, or practicing paced breathing to shift our physiological state. We can practice radical acceptance by reminding ourselves that there's something we want that we can't have, and it's not the catastrophe we think it is that we can't have it. And we can turn to self-soothing strategies to bring comfort rather than condemnation. Emotion regulation helps us replace self-judgment with compassion. When shame or anger takes hold, we can use the skill of taking an opposite action, responding with kindness when the physical urge is to be cruel or critical. We might reframe our thoughts with something more balanced and self-compassionate, like, I'm human, I'm learning, and I don't have to be perfect. Finally, if the schema of punitiveness is impacting how we treat others, interpersonal effectiveness skills help us repair relationships and interact with greater empathy and respect. We can use Dear Man to ask for what we need clearly and respectfully. Give helps us nurture relationships through a gentle presence and validation. And Fast supports us in maintaining our self-respect, even in difficult conversations. Together, these skills give us the emotional and behavioural flexibility to challenge the rigid, punishing voice of the schema and respond instead with balance, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, acceptance, and strength. The schema of punitiveness is a very painful experience. At the same time, it's important to recognise that it's definitely not a permanent state. It was built and created in childhood to help us survive emotional pain, but now, with awareness and skill, we can change our perception of it, still needing to be fact today. Schema therapy gives us the map. It helps us understand why we do what we do. DBT gives us the tools to help us know what to do if we want to change it. By strengthening our state of wise mind, building a healthy adult within our system, and practicing new behavioural responses, we can stop punishing ourselves for being human and start building a life that we want to live, one that's full of balance, compassion, empathy, and connection. In the PDF at the bottom of the page, you're going to find a worksheet that helps you process if the schema of punitiveness is one that's relevant to you, and also help you understand how it might show up in your system. If you can, take some time to go over this slowly. Spend some time sitting with the answers to the questions rather than just answering them straight away. Reflect on how this schema might be present in your system, and then go to work building awareness for how it shows up for you so we can activate the skills we need to change the behavioural response. Guys, I hope this video shed some light on the schema of punitiveness, as well as the things we can do to shift the deep-rooted stories connected to it that don't serve us well in adult life. If you want to know more, come join the conversation in the weekly online meetings that I offer for free on Zoom. I'll leave a link to the page containing more information about these groups in the description below. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, throw a like on this video, and turn on the notifications to get all the latest from me and the Liberation Place. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you again soon. Take care, be safe, and be well.